Okay, for lesson 10, we're looking at the rise of the two-party system in Georgia and looking at that shift from being just a state of Democrats to having a two-party system with Republicans and Democrats. Your task today is to complete a note-taking sheet while you watch this video, and you can see an example of it over here. This is shared on through Google Classroom, but if you want a paper copy so you can write your notes on it, that's fine. You should be able to answer the majority of the questions just based on this lesson, but for the rest of them, you may need to do a little bit of extra research. And then the end result will be for you to develop and express your opinion based on the question of, do we need a two-party system? Well, to begin with, we need to know what a political party is. And a political party is a group of like-minded individuals that share common beliefs and ideas that work together in the hopes of electing their members to political office. And the two major political parties in Georgia and the United States today are the Democrats and Republicans. The role of the political parties, they serve four key functions. Any political party today does. The first one is to select candidates. Political parties help to narrow the field from a multitude of wannabes to a credible few, and this makes the voting process a lot easier. The second function is to mobilize voters. Political parties inform and energize the members of their party, and they do fundraising to simplify their candidates' ability to finance their campaigns. The third function is to facilitate governance. Political parties help to bring order to the process of policymaking. It creates a network of ready-made supporters for politicians at every level of government, federal, state, and local, and they help to implement legislation. And the fourth key function of political parties is to monitor the opposing party when it is in power. Political parties are the watchdog for the public. Because political parties oppose each other, the party that is not currently in power usually keeps a close eye on their opponent and notifies the public of any wrongdoing or any type of misstep. So a little bit of history to help you look at when this change began in Georgia to shift from a one to a two-party system. After Reconstruction, the Democratic Party dominated Georgia politics for over 100 years. For the most part, the Democratic primary was the state's true election. So you need to think back to the white primary and what the end of the white primary meant for Georgia politics. Because the Democratic primary was usually the state's true election, this is because Republicans often had a weak showing in these elections, and a lot of times they didn't even have a candidate run at all because they knew that it would be a losing situation. However, in the 1960s, we began to see a real political shift. This was based on several factors, with the most important one being the National Democratic Party's support of the Civil Rights Movement. In response to that, the county unit system and reapportionment allowed for more equal representation in the state from more than one political party. So what changed in the National Democratic Party? The change to supporting civil rights laws actually started in the 1930s. Think back to the New Deal and Eugene Talmadge's attitude toward Roosevelt's and his administration's programs. Eugene Talmadge was not the only guy that disliked these progressive changes. A lot of white Georgians began to take issue with the National Democratic Party and Roosevelt's New Deal policies. As the National Party began to become more and more progressive and favor civil rights laws, many white Southerners began to leave the Democratic Party. By the 1940s, some political leaders in the South created the Dixiecrats, which was a new political party. The Dixiecrats fought civil rights legislation. Other Democrats such as George Wallace and Lester Maddox, became independents. However, the majority, or a lot of white Southerners, simply just shifted their allegiance from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. So, with this shift, did that mean the Republicans didn't want civil rights? This is not the case. The Republican platform is based on smaller federal government. They didn't have, they were not hostile to civil rights or equality. What the Republican Party's goal was to shift some of the federal power back to the states. Also, one of the things that helped Georgia become more of a two-party state was the end of the county unit system and reapportionment. This made it easier for Republicans to run for office in districts where districts that were like-minded with the Republican platform. So what did this shift look like for Georgia voters? The shift for Georgia to the Republican Party was very slow. The first sign of this shifting allegiance was seen in presidential elections. In 1964, Georgia's electoral votes went to a Republican president for the first time. Since then, the only Democratic presidential nominees to win Georgia were Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. And if you look over here, you can see what our electoral votes look like as far as presidential elections from 1964 to 2012. The switch to a two-party system was a little slower when you look at the congressional or legislative branch of our government. It was a little slower in the Senate. In 1980, Republican Mac Mattingly defeated Herman Talmadge for office. Mattingly was then defeated by Democrat White Fowler in 1987, who in turn was defeated by Republican Paul Coverdell in 1993. Georgia Senators Johnny Isakson and Zaxby Chambliss were also both Republicans. So just looking at the Senate part, you can see we kind of flip-flop back and forth with each election from Republican to Democrat and back. As far as Congress and the House of Representatives, there are 14 Republicans from Georgia and 8 Democrats from Georgia that represent us in the legislative branch. The shift to a two-party system was the slowest at the state and local level. Republican Bob Callaway won the popular vote for governor in 1966, but in the next gubernatorial or governor's election in 1970, Jimmy Carter, who was a Democrat, did win. And it wasn't until 2002 that Georgia elected a Republican governor. Sonny Perdue, who was a former Democrat and switched parties, was the first Republican governor in Georgia since Reconstruction. All right, so now it's your turn. You should have been able to complete the first 6 questions or respond to the first 6 statements on your sheet, your note-taking sheet. And if you couldn't do that, you can always go back and rewind. So you're going to use that information to complete the last few questions on here. Now that you know the purpose for political parties, think about what would it be like without political parties? Do we need a two-party system, or do we need more than 2 main parties within federal, state, and local elections? Your paragraph, and you need to keep it concise, get to the point, but make sure that you provide evidence for your statements. And if you have any questions, write them down and make sure you ask me in class.